Professor Norman Finkelstein joined us today to show support for this movement, to support everyone here against the oppression of Columbia University. Please come closer. Please come closer as Professor Norman Finkelstein gives his remarks to everyone here in support of the Columbia University Apartheid Divest movement on campus that has now inspired a big movement across U.S. universities. So let me introduce Professor Norman Finkelstein.
Thank you for inviting me, and thank you for, I'm not sure if I can do better than that, okay?
Louder, please. Just a little louder. Thank you, sorry.
I don't think I can, that's the problem. Thank you for inviting me, and I'm here. I'm not much of a rally speaker. I'm not like my friend Cornel West. I'm more of a seminar speaker. So I don't want to give a pep rally or a pep speech. Basically, I would just like to make a few elementary comments and then hopefully hear from you. I suspect some, and maybe a majority of you, are familiar with my opinions, and if you would like to ask me about any of them, I think this is as good an occasion as any for us to have a substantive and productive dialogue. I don't have knowledge about the situation at Columbia other than what one would know from reading the newspapers. And I did watch President Stefanik's testimony at that tribunal. So I am familiar with what she had to say. Obviously, it was a disappointment. My own view was that it was an utterly impossible situation that she was placed. I'm not making any excuses for what she had to say, but I'm not sure how one could have navigated that situation. It was basically carrion below and vultures above. And it was, as I said, in my opinion, an impossible situation, even as I fully acknowledge what she had to say was wholly unacceptable, and one might also say it was cowardly, and one might say that she certainly did have a minimum obligation, a bare minimum obligation to defend the principle of academic freedom, and she did not do that. One commentary I read stated that the two words one never heard during that interrogation were academic freedom. And the fact that she chose not to go there was, in my view, wholly unacceptable. As to the movement itself, I don't want to claim any kind of expertise, and I have to always be careful of appearing to be condescending, patronizing, and being all wise in these matters. I would simply say, based on my experience, the most important things are organization, leadership, and having in one's mind clear objectives. And clear objectives means basically two things. One is slogans that are going to unite and not divide. In my youth, when I was roughly your age, or actually your age, I was what was called back in the day, I was a Maoist, a follower of Chairman Mao in China. And one of the slogans which he was famously associated with him was the slogan, unite the many to defeat the few. And that means at any juncture in a political struggle, you have to figure out how can you unite the many and isolate the few with a clear objective in mind. Obviously, you don't want to unite the many for with a goal or an objective which is not your objective. So you have to figure out, having your objective in mind, what is the slogan which will work the best to unite the many and defeat the few. I was gratified that the movement as a whole, shortly after October 7th, spontaneously, intuitively, they grasped the right, in my opinion, the right slogan. And the slogan was, ceasefire now. Now, some of you might think in retrospect, well, what was so brilliant about that slogan? Wasn't it obvious? But in fact, political slogans are never obvious. There are all sorts of routes and paths and byways that people can go down, which are very, in my opinion, destructive to the movement. And I found the fact that it wasn't a leadership decision, I don't think. It was a spontaneous, intuitive sense by the protesters. The right slogan at this moment is ceasefire now. I would also say, in my opinion, I'm trying to discuss brass tacks, not high theory. In my opinion, the slogans have to be as clear as possible, leaving no room for ambiguity and no room for misinterpretation, a misinterpretation that's exploited to discredit a movement. So if you take the history of struggle, there was the famous slogan going already back to the late 1800s, the 8-hour working day. It was a clear slogan. We want an 8-hour working day. And more recently, in your own living memory, for all the disappointments, in my opinion, of the Bernie Sanders candidacy, I do believe one of the geniuses of his candidacy, for all the disappointment, was because he had 40, 50 years of experience on the left end of the political spectrum for all. Now, you might think, what's so smart about that slogan? It was a very good slogan. He knew that he could reach, using Chairman Mao's not concept, but Chairman Mao's political insight. He knew he could reach 80% of Americans with that slogan. That slogan was going to resonate with 80% of the American people. He knew abolish student debt, free college tuition. It was going to resonate with a large part of his potential constituency. He didn't go beyond what was possible at that particular moment. He didn't go beyond it, but I do think he reached what you might call the political limit. The limit at that point in his candidacy was roughly jobs for all, public works program, Green New Deal, Medicare for all, abolish student debt, and free college tuition. Those were the right slogans, and as I say, it may seem trivial, but it really is not. It takes a lot of hard work and a lot of sensitivity to the constituency that you're trying to reach to figure out the right slogans. In my own view, and I'm going to stop at this point, my own view is some of the slogans of the current movement don't work because they leave, in my opinion, but you guys, the future belongs to you, not to me. And I am a strong believer in democracy with a small d. You have to decide for yourselves. But in my view, you've got to pick the slogans, which are not ambiguous, leaving no wiggle room for misinterpretation, and B, have the largest likelihood at any given political moment to reach the largest number of people. That's my, I don't want to call it advice, because I'm not here to give advice. That's my political experience. And at this point, I'm happy to hear from you and to get some clarity on what's going on at Columbia University right now, since, as I said, everything has been mediated by the media, except for the hearings, which I did watch from start to finish. Thank you.
Just for everyone to know, Professor Finkelstein will be at Columbia on Monday from 7 to 9. And at SIVA building, we will announce about that later, so you can attend there and ask more questions. But now I think Professor has some time to take a few questions from you, and then we will have another speaker.
Yes, I think the wise thing to do is to form a line here so you can use the microphone as well.
So I just wanted to ask, out of all our slogans, which one stands out to you the most, and which one do you think resonates with many?
Obviously, as I've already said, I believe the ceasefire now slogan is the most important. I would say on a college campus, that slogan should be twinned with the slogan of free speech, which resonates on a college campus. So I would, if I were in your situation, I would say free Gaza, free speech. That should be the slogan. Because I think on a college campus, people have a real problem defending the repression of speech. Now, I recognize that in recent years, because of the emergence of the identity politics, cancel culture ambiance on college campuses, the whole issue of free speech and academic freedom has become severely, let's call it, clouded by that movement. I have opposed any restrictions on free speech, and I've opposed the identity politics cancel culture on the grounds of preserving free speech. And I'll just say, not as a point of pride or egotism, or to say I told you so, just as a factual matter. In the last book I wrote, I explicitly said in the book, you can find it for those of you who are interested, I explicitly said that if you use the standard of hurt feelings as a grounds to stifle or repress speech, then Israeli students will say that when Palestinians protest this, that, or the other, they're going to use the claim of hurt feelings, pained emotions, and that whole language and vocabulary, which is so easily turned against those who have been using it in the name of their own cause. That was a disaster waiting to happen. I wrote about it because I knew what would happen, though obviously I couldn't have predicted the scale after October 7th, but it was perfectly obvious what was going to happen. In my opinion, the most powerful weapon you have, the most powerful weapon is the weapon of truth and justice. And you should never create a situation where you can be silenced on the grounds of feelings and emotions. If you listen, which all of you did, if you listen to President Stefanik's remarks, it was all about hurt feelings, feeling afraid. That whole language has completely corrupted the notion of free speech and academic freedom. And you have now that experience, and hopefully going forward, that language and those concepts will be jettisoned from a movement that calls itself as belonging to, if I can use the expression, a leftist tradition. It's a complete catastrophe when that kind of language is infiltrated into what's, you can call it, I hate the expression, but leftist discourse. When that language is infiltrated, it's in my view, a catastrophe, as you're seeing now. Even this notion that I don't agree with the slogan. I'm going to be candid with you, and I don't make any claim to infallibility. I'm simply stating, based on my long experience in politics, I don't agree with the slogan, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. It's very easy to amend and just say, from the river to the sea, Palestinians will be free. And that simple amendment, that little amendment, you drastically reduce the possibility of being manipulatively misunderstood. But when I was hearing that this slogan causes pain, anguish, fear, I have to ask myself a simple question. What does the slogan, "We support the IDF," what does that convey? The IDF right now, the Israeli Defense Forces, it is a genocidal army. Why are you allowed to have public support for a genocide, at this moment, a genocidal state and a genocidal army? Okay, the language doesn't seem as provocative. We support the IDF. But the content is 10,000 times more offensive and outrageous to any, so to speak, civilized mind and civilized heart than the "from the river to the sea" slogan. And the only reason there is an argument about that slogan, even though, as I said, I disagree with it, but that's a separate matter, whether I agree or disagree with it. The only reason there is an argument about that slogan is because we have legitimized this notion that hurt feelings are grounds for stifling speech. And that, to me, is totally unacceptable. It's wholly alien to the culture of academic freedom, which some of you might say, oh, that's such a bourgeois notion, it's socially constructed, and all that other crap. I don't believe that at all. You will read the most eloquent defenses of the principle of unhindered, untrammeled freedom of speech. You'll read the most eloquent defenses of it by people like Rosa Luxemburg, who was, by any reckoning, an extraordinary individual and an extraordinary revolutionary. But being both did not in any way mean she would accept any curbs on the principle of free speech. Free speech for two reasons. Number one, no radical movement can make any kind of progress unless it has clarity about its goals and clarity about what it might be doing that's wrong. You're always engaging in course corrections. Everybody makes mistakes. You constantly have to engage in course corrections. And unless you have free speech, you don't know what you're doing that's wrong. And number two, the truth is not an enemy. The truth is not an enemy, in my view. It's not an enemy to oppressed peoples, and it's certainly not an enemy to the people of Gaza. And so we should maximize our commitment to free speech so as to maximize the dissemination of what's true about what's happening in Gaza, and not allow any excuse for repressing that truth. That's how I see it. Yes, I think if you could just come up. Thank you.
Hi, Professor Finkelstein. So based on what you just said, so my professor, Joseph Massad, he always says that terms don't come out of nowhere and phrases and meanings evolve over time, right? From the river to the sea was being said when I was a freshman here during the BDS referendum, and it was not being penalized or criminalized, and it was understood for what it was. It was being understood as an expressive statement that holds emotion and that holds deep meaning for a community. And that is also valuable to protests, no? Like the human aspect of it. I feel like if we're all focused all the time on trying to communicate the message correctly to the United States government, which quite frankly I'm not sure how clear you have to be with them for them to do something, we're inherently repressing the human and emotional part of the protest. So I don't know, like, why do you think Free Palestine is not the correct statement? What is the correct statement? If Free Palestine is quite simple, and people who are educated on the subject and who believe on the subject understand what it means. It means decolonize, it means liberate, it means don't place the blame on the people that didn't do anything. My question basically is, don't you think that conditioning speech in that way by not using those slogans, even though they hold meaning and they hold power for the community that is fighting for their own rights, don't you think it dehumanize the whole fight? And shouldn't that also be a part of student speech? That's it.
Well, I'm glad people challenge me. I think that's a useful thing. And I don't like to play to the choir. You're doing 10,000 things right, and it's deeply moving what you've achieved, what you've accomplished, and the fact that many of you are putting your futures on the line. That's very impressive. I remember during the anti-war movement, it was a different era, obviously, anti-war and the anti-Vietnam War movement. And I remember there were young people who wanted to go to medical school. And if you got arrested, you weren't going to medical school once you got that record. And I remember many people struggling with the choice between getting arrested for the cause, and the cause was not abstract. It was, by the end of the Vietnam War, the estimates are just Vietnamese will leave aside Laotians and Cambodians, between 2 and 3 million Vietnamese were killed. It was an unfolding horror show every day. And people struggled with whether they would risk their entire futures. And many of you come from backgrounds where it was a real struggle to get to where you are today, Columbia University. So I deeply respect your courage, your conviction, and every opportunity when I speak, I acknowledge the incredible, really incredible conviction and tenacity of your generation, which in many ways is more impressive than my own, for the simple reason that in my generation, we can't deny the fact, I don't believe it's the total picture, but a significant aspect, I'm not going to say significant, an aspect of the anti-war movement was the fact that the draft weighed on a lot of people. You could get the student deferment for the 4 years that you're in college, but once the deferment passed, there was a good chance you were going over there and you were coming back in a body bag. So there was an element of selfishness, not in the bad sense selfishness, but an element of, let's say, self-concern. Whereas you young people, you're doing it for a tiny, stateless people halfway around the world. And that's deeply moving, deeply impressive, and deeply inspiring. And every time I join one of the demonstrations, I'm really, as I said, very moved by the energy, the tenacity of your generation. So, with that as a long introduction, so let's get down to the question. And the question to me comes back to my very initial remarks. I said, any movement has to ask itself, what is its goal? What is its objective? What are they trying to achieve? Now, as the young woman said, can she just raise her hand? Or can I have, you mind, you don't want to give your name? It's okay if you don't. Okay, just the young woman, I don't want to get, cause you problems. Yes. As the young woman said, as the young woman said, a few years ago, that was a slogan of the movement, from the river to the sea. I remember in the 1970s, one of the slogans was, everybody should know we support the PLO, which was not an easy slogan to shout on Fifth Avenue in the 1970s. I do vividly recall looking at the rooftops and waiting for the sniper to dispatch me to eternity at an early age. However, there's a very big difference when you're essentially a political cult and you can shout any slogan that you like because it has no public repercussions or reverberations. You're essentially talking to yourself. You're setting up a table on campus, giving out literature for Palestine. You might get 5 people who are interested. There's a very big difference between that situation and the situation in which you are today, where you have a very large constituency that potentially and realistically you can reach. And so you have to adjust to the new political reality that there are large numbers of people, probably a majority, who are potentially receptive to your message. Number 2, I completely understand what you're saying, that sometimes a slogan is one that gives spirit to those who are involved in the movement. And then you have to figure out the right balance between the spirit that you want to inspire in your movement and the audience or the constituency out there that's not part of the movement that you want to reach. So if you're saying to me, I'm a killjoy by saying this, if we modify the slogan a little, it's not as much fun, I kind of get that. However, I do believe one has to exercise, not in a conservative sense, but in a radical sense. One has to exercise in a moment like this, if for no other reason than for the people of Gaza, one has to exercise maximum responsibility. Maximum responsibility to get out of one's navel, to crawl out of one's ego, and to always keep in mind the question, what are we trying to accomplish at this particular moment? That's my view.